Okay. Okay, this is the Eureka Springs Parks and Recreation Commission workshop for November 2nd. First item of business is give Mr. Fisher the floor to bring us up to date on what he has been working on for us.
Good evening. Okay, so I'm going to read this so I don't ramble too far. This is an update on the Urban and Community Forestry Grant, a little bit about the Eureka Springs Linear Arboretum and the Spring Reservation Project. Considerable organizational progress continues with the working group of Steve, Scott, and myself, with a particular focus on the development of a project management process and document sharing to distinguish the objectives and tasks of the four separate components. Using the Glade Research Project, the software applications ClickUp and Dropbox have been acquired and are in use to assign tasks and particular recorded activity within this component in particular. An initial field survey of the glades on the eastern side of Lake Leatherwood City Park. Several long treks into the ravines and ridges have been tracked using GPS spatial recording through cell phones. Photographs of plant materials have been cataloged, and a working map of the covered ground is being assembled. A set of documents are being prepared to begin contacting a scope of experts in the area of glades to engage their services to consult and provide valuable input to develop a very site-specific restoration and management plan, along with soliciting their experiences to help us also consider optimum approaches for developing a digital learning center within an active research and long-term restoration context. The Open Space Conservation Management Plan and public participation components are similarly proceeding with the gathering and review of preliminary research documents, creating initial mapping platforms to then bundle these efforts into the framework established in ClickUp. The initial open space mapping will correlate several layers of geographic info to present the 6 square miles of Eureka Springs and how the significant inventory of parks assets within that municipal footprint are situated and directly inform the conservation framework. My presence tonight is part of the community participation component to inform constituents and stakeholders and the Parks Commission of the opportunity to be involved in a community forest effort. The Eureka Springs Linear Arboretum, started in summer of 2019, is now a mapped database of significant tree specimens representing nearly 80 species and tallying a total of nearly 600 trees. This info will add a specific urban forestry element to a growing compilation of our local geographic knowledge and our natural resource management efforts. Similarly, the ongoing Spring Reservation Project, since this July, has established a growing compendium of fieldwork and research to present the historic, cultural, and physiographic status of this group of early public green spaces that exemplify our town's namesake. As the forestry grant narrative states, these components are intended to create a set of valuable planning tools for parks to consider as the concept of an integrated, comprehensive planning process proceeds. And on a sort of editorial note, with all the various efforts underway to improve our parks, site plans for day use areas, sports fields, along with creek, lake, and dam improvement assessments, downhill trail area improvements, the work underway at Basin Spring Park, the scheduled work at Magnetic Spring, stabilization needs of the dam at Black Bass Lake Park, etc., in a cumulative sense would argue for an immediate need to assemble the preliminary staging of a master plan effort. This document of maps is an ongoing collection and evolution of data that will inform open space and conservation, as well as glades. Glades are up here on the upper left, a small map. It's a little hard to see, but it shows outlines of the glades on the eastern side of the park, as well as the utility lines crossing through to give you a bit of your bearing when you're out there. And an interesting map, too, in the middle, the dark green one, the land cover, CONUS, impervious surfaces, will help us to determine the higher developed areas of town. And then I'll use overlays of specific scenarios like the zoning map to show where certain parts of town are actually administered by the Planning Commission or regulated by the Planning Commission. And so these layers can just go on and on to give us as many contexts as we choose to investigate as we really determine the various uses of parks properties as they are situated now, and how those uses might change and how the lands around them will change per se. And I know that I'm stretching it a bit here, but it's all meant to put us into a planning mode as to how to plan for the future, as opposed to simply going on year to year without consideration for the larger picture of the city's footprint. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank y'all.
Yeah, thank you, Chris.
Before we proceed to the next item, I would just like to thank you for the time that you and Steve and Dickey both have been working on this. And I just want to make the comment that this isn't just to produce pretty maps.
Yeah.
But we were talking just today about how much time and money we're spending right now to cut very large trees that are at the pocket parks and basin park, and because they endanger structures or people or cars. And this is leading us to the type of planning where our staff will know that as the trees that eventually will become large, a big oak tree, for instance, or let's say a small oak tree at Harding Spring, that 20 years or 30 years later is going to be huge and dropping limbs on vehicles. We'll know to not allow those to get large like that. We'll plant smaller, more appropriate trees. Mm-hmm. And so in the long run, it's going to save us a lot of money by having appropriate trees in appropriate places. And of course, there's much more that we will get from this, but thank you. This is, it's nice to see these maps, but the practical aspects of this type of thing is going to serve us well for decades. Thanks again.
Yeah.
Do you guys have any questions for Chris?
No.
Okay.
That's a good thing, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I will tell you, Chris, it's from at least the limited time, slightly over a decade that I've been here, I think that the reason why most master planning efforts fall apart is because the scope gets so big that it overwhelms everybody and they just don't know what to do with it. Mm-hmm. I think that's one of the reasons why we've kind of picked certain things to focus on and start building off of those. Scott has put together an RFP for consultants to take a comprehensive look at Basin Park now. We know that there are myriad small problems there, but the small problems are indicative of bigger problems and kind of poor planning decisions in the past. And before we spend little bits of money in various places that aren't going to really accomplish anything, we need to have an overall picture of it. You and I have spoken a bit about if you just go through the municipal code and look at all of the parks facilities, there doesn't seem to have ever been a real targeted mission for parks other than, well, give them this and give them that, and give them all the springs, and give them Lake Leatherwood and give them Black Bass except for the dam. There isn't really a clear mission altogether, and we need to kind of figure out what that is. And as we've talked about, there's an interesting paragraph in the municipal code. After it lists all the springs, it has a paragraph that basically said, and any other spring that may belong to the city of Eureka Springs.
Oh, just any other spring.
That's our responsibility. So, we both recognize the need, and I think part of the work that Chris has been doing in town is going to help us define what, and in fact, I think you mentioned that you've turned up 4 of the springs listed in there that are either on private property or we don't know where they are or what they are. To my knowledge, there are no legal plats defining all of the spring garden parks. So, I don't see this being a short-term effort. It's going to keep growing. We're going to keep, adding to it and defining things and hopefully refine the mission of the Parks Commission with regard to different properties and how we address them. And I thank you for your efforts on this. Okay, Scott,
Okay.
floor is
Thank you.
yours.
We're going to kind of combine numbers 2 and 3, which is introduction to the new form of profit and loss statements and chart of accounts. And of course, that's ultimately leading to budget items for next year's budget. So I'm going to start by handing you a couple of documents. First of all is a balance sheet, probably one that we won't need to be spending much time on. As far as financial statements go, our profit and loss statement is the primary one that we focus on, but that's a up-to-date balance sheet that was just printed this afternoon. One of the main focuses, or the main focus of the rest of our evening and our budgeting process is going to be our profit and loss statement. I'm handing you one that was printed as of this afternoon. And what I'd like to point out about this is not so much the numbers, although I would encourage you to keep that as I start sending you documents that are budget related over the next few weeks. You might want to look at the P&L statement and know what we spent or what we earned this year from a particular account. But one of the more notable things is that this P&L statement is 4 pages long, or 3.5. Now, about a year ago, this was probably, 8 or 9 pages, you might recall.
Yes.
And so we've been spending the year whittling away accounts that we didn't feel that we needed. And it was really, at that point, the books were accurate in the sense that the money we spent and the money we received was accurate, but we had so many different accounts that were redundant or superfluous that, for instance, if somebody went and purchased a hammer, our bookkeeper might have 10 different accounts that he could decide or try to decide which it went into. And that's just silly. And it led to a confusing statement and one that was difficult to read or understand. And so we've been streamlining that quite a bit, and that ultimately has led to Kevin providing what I think we're going to stick with, which I'm handing you now. And the notable thing about this is that it's 1 page long.
Wow.
What we've done, among other things, is gotten rid of a lot of the granularity that we had even in the existing one that I handed you just a moment ago, that we would have an account and a sub-account. I'm just looking at equipment, just a random account that I looked at. We had equipment and then equipment rental and tools. So 3 sub-accounts. Under lodging, for instance, we have lodging and then cabin rental, camping cabins, pet fees, etc. Well, we don't need that sort of detail in a profit and loss statement. If ever we need that detail, we can certainly create a report to give it to us. So if we want to know someday how our camping is broken down, we can do that by creating a special report. And so what we've done is we've gone from, I think, 9 pages to 3.5 to what you see before you. That's a 1-page document. And we will then create or recreate a chart of accounts that matches that. Of course, we'll have additional accounts for assets and liabilities, which end up affecting our balance sheet. But as far as our P&L statement, which is the one that we're most interested in, what did we spend, how much did we receive, this will be broken down into about a 1-page report in the future. So the plan is we'll finish out the year with our existing system, and in the meanwhile, we will transition to this new system. I'm going to hand out one in a few moments that has the actual numbers for this year and some projections for next year. But you'll notice also that there'll be the accounts will be numbered, which just helps us in being able to format our reports in different ways that the commission might want. So tremendously streamlining it, numbering the accounts, and simplifying things is the goal by the first of the year. And I should say we're close to being there. As a final comment, I would say that the plan is that we're going to, in essence, start from scratch with these, with this new system. And the numbering, by the way, helps us to do that because we will only use numbered accounts in the future. So all of the old accounts that we've been using will not be used anymore, and the only time you'll see them is if we do a comparison between next year and this year. The accounts that were used this year will still haunt us, so to speak, for a year, and they'll show up on
Yeah, it'll take a little bit more effort to do the year-over-year comparisons for the next year,
Right.
until we get it all in there. I think the biggest thing was that, and credit to Scott for getting it from the original 9 pages down to the 3.5 pages, because we were doing things like tracking fuel costs by vehicle,
Yeah.
tracking utilities by location every spring as a water bill and an electric bill that's associated with it. Those are things that at such a granular level really don't matter in a P&L and really don't matter from a budgeting standpoint. You just need to know what it is that you're spending in utilities. You can always go back to the general ledger to look at things in detail and see where things were spent. Now, this isn't, and this is kind of boiled down from like 2.5 pages that clearly spells out what goes under each one of these categories. And that's one of the biggest things is that Scott's going to have to work with Nikki so that Nikki understands he doesn't create any new accounts. Everything is covered and everything should fit into this. And if not, we need to understand what it is and make sure that it goes in the right place, and that's it. But that was one of the problems in the past, was when it wasn't clear where something went, a new account was just created under whatever heading. And then we tracked things for Leatherwood, for the ball fields separately, and in town separately. And we did that not only for utilities and various overhead costs, but we did for vehicle maintenance and for fuel and for, things that just don't make sense to track that way. We maintain vehicles, they're all parks vehicles. They don't need to be broken out by Leatherwood and in town because they're all used everywhere. So
Right.
I think we've gotten to a point where it's simple enough that we can look at, and it's always easier to look at a single page financial statement than a 3.5 page or a 9 page and really understand it. This is going to provide us a lot of clarity. It's going to make it easier for budgeting because the budgets in the past were budgeting things like donations. You don't budget donations. You don't know what you're going to get in donations. It's not realistic to budget it. You add it. It reflects it, and if you need to change what you've approved to spend because you've gotten a large donation for something, that we do that in the meeting, that it's not something that should go into a budget ever. So I think it's going to make the process easier once we adapt to it.
Yes.
And
When I say we, I mean Scott. So,
well, also, I think when you give a clerk, Nikki, somebody like that, a list with so many different categories, they feel obliged to figure out where that hammer from whatever goes to.
right.
Where when you give them a more broad, understandable sense of where things go, it's easier to understand what accounts they go in. I think that job will be easier, too.
Tools are tools.
Tools are tools,
And
exactly.
that's just it. There's
That's it.
one line. There's tools and
need-
equipment under $5,000, and then under what we have as capital.
Capital
or
ones, yeah.
major expenses.
Right.
So, and I should also say that the capital we use, we've been using capital expenses on the financial statements simply because in the municipal code, the 8% sales tax is directed towards capital improvements and repairs at Lake Leatherwood. So it's not that we're necessarily treating all of this as capital, but it is major expenses at Lake Leatherwood are the only things that we can spend that 8% sales tax revenue on. So that's why we're segregating.
That makes
that.
sense, because we wouldn't treat them like capital expenses normally, because we're
Right. Well,
the same way you would
we
in a
do,
bus- in a
but
corp.
that's
Well,
another issue that Scott's
sh-
having to dig into. If you
Yeah,
look at the
we
balance
shouldn't,
sheet.
right, because we're not a corporate business. We shouldn't be doing the
If you
same.
look at the
right.
balance sheet, we actually track fixed assets like the cabins, and if we do any major work on it, in the past, that was added to the value of the fixed asset, as though it were a capital improvement, but then we never depreciate anything. So, and this is one thing that, you know, when we have the rest of this sorted out and we're moving forward, we're going to have to do a little bit of digging and get some advice on what the best way is to treat the fixed assets on the balance sheet, because they can't just grow forever. They don't.
Right.
Vehicles go in at the purchase cost. They're never depreciated. Granted, we're not a business. We don't have a tax liability.
Right, we don't need the
Not a reason to
depreciation, right.
depreciate it. But a lot of nonprofits do depreciate assets to track life cycle, so that you depreciate it down to zero, so that when you have to get rid of that vehicle that is now worth
Makes sense.
$1,200 instead of the $30,000 that you paid for it, it's not a big shock to
Makes
the
sense.
balance sheet.
So you
But
still do it, but just for a different
Somebody
reason.
smarter than me is going to have to tell us how we go about doing that appropriately.
And along those lines, I spoke at length today with Christy Ball, who's a local accountant, about this, and we're going to meet Friday to look at things. First thing she said as I started to tell her the story is what we had already decided, so it was a good confirmation that, yeah, we really should start from scratch. So with this new chart of accounts and the P&L statement formulated the way it is, this will be easy. And then I asked her, I said, the thing that troubles me about that is our balance sheet, because we're just taking all that old data, and she says, no, you start with the numbers that you have. She said, basically, we start out on January 1st with 4 accounts, and that's our 4 bank accounts. And she says, wait until we have our audit is done, and we'll have an audited balance sheet, and then we just use those numbers
That's where
to
we
start
start.
fresh. We
Yeah.
have audited numbers that we'll use for for all of our fixed assets, and then we just need to hammer out a policy, as Kevin just said. How do we deal with capital improvements that are minor? We're adding a new window to a cabin. Well, that's not really a capital expenditure as much as it is maintenance. So, and there's some general rules of thumb there, but over the many years of parks using our current accounting system, it's changed when something was a capital expense versus just an expense. And so starting fresh like we will is going to be really nice. I've asked her as well if we do end up using her for this. I should interject, we were going to use Scott Barden because he was quite familiar with our books, but He's pretty busy with some other things at the moment. So whomever we use will take a look at our fixed assets and make sure that we have a firm policy. And that'll be in writing. One of the things I'm doing as well is writing up all of our procedures in a procedures manual. So future staff or directors will know what the game rules are. So I'm really now comfortable with basically a brand new set of books starting the first. Obviously, if we need any of the old data, it's there. And we will just be starting with a much cleaner, more refined system. That's going to serve us very well, I believe. So that being said, the next and the last thing that I'm going to give you is the same document I just gave you, the proposed format of our P&L statement. Except what I've done, I have added the numbers next to the accounts, and then I've provided a column that has what our to-date numbers are, what we spent as of the 1st of November. I then have a column where they're extrapolated through the end of the year. And this is just so as you're considering different budget ideas, you can look and see, well, how much did we make this year, or how much did we spend this year on certain things. You know, we know, for instance, if we spend a certain amount this year on utilities, that we're liable to be very close to that next year. And then the third column, projected for 2022, those numbers are just raw right now. They're just, I haven't even started to put in there what I'm asking for next year. So please, when you look at this, realize this is just the beginning.
Yeah.
And then if you look towards the bottom, all the way till about 5:45, I was adding, on page 2, I was adding just a wish list, so to speak, for the things that we may want to spend next year. And so I still need to add more. Also, each of you might have things that occur to you that we want to add. I just ran out of time to get those in there. Once we've done that, we can prioritize the, well, I will put in the numbers for the routine things such as maintenance and repairs and fuel, utilities, et cetera. I will put proposed budget numbers for those items, but for any of the more expensive, you know, the project type things, we're going to have to go through this wish list and whittle it down quite a bit. So for now, it's really just ideas, and within the next week or two, we'll firm those up a little bit. You might ask why anything that's highlighted in yellow. That's just because it's an item that we want to consider, but we have no idea at this point what the cost on that would be. So other areas, like you'll notice road repairs up at the top, $120,000. That's, we've had 2 bids for that, so I know about what that should cost. So if it's not highlighted, we know that that's a close number to what we should end up spending. So this, at this point, is just the raw data that we need to formulate the budget. Of course, it's my job to fill that third column in and come to you with some requests, but I like the idea of having the items that we're considering for perhaps another discussion, maybe our next workshop, and then the final, the regular meeting in December, we should be able to have a budget that has had consideration of the commissioners, and we will have had at least 1, if not 2, public meetings by then, so the public can comment on it. So that's where we're heading. So the last thing, just as far as input for you in budgeting, is Nikki put together a couple reports. I didn't even ask for him. He anticipated them. It was nice of him to do this, but there's some interesting things that I would just give you to put our operations in context. We had, just for our lodging last year, we had 2 months that we were closed down, but our total, and other than those 2 months, we we did very well, and we had a total of $75,749 in all forms of lodging, which includes, I should say, lodging that would include camping and RV sites, et cetera. We are already this year at 109,000, and I project that to be 120,000, or probably a little better by the end of the year.
Wow.
So even given that we had 2 months with no income last year, we're way ahead, and that's good to know. The only other thing, just to put some things in perspective, our number one source of revenue was cabins at $48,200. This is this year to date. $48,256. That's 26% of our revenue from all sources at Leatherwood. The second is rather astonishing. Our second biggest revenue generator is the shuttles, $38,152. That's 20.44% of our revenue from Lake Leatherwood. And
That's the net number?
that is the net, yes. And if you look
The
at...
gross is
The gross
considerably
could
higher than that.
be determined very easily by looking at shuttle expenses for the year to date are $14,124 and projected to be roughly close to 17,000 at the end of the year. So you could, but see, all these other numbers are net as well.
Right.
So, and our last one are just camping, which would be camping sites and RV sites, and that was $24,841. I give you those numbers to put things in perspective if we're going to decide whether we're going to put money towards new camping pads, for instance, versus I've got a request in for some boats, or actually our most popular boat type rental is the paddle boards, and so I do have a request, and they're cheap. I put a request in, well, not yet, but it's listed here on page 2 for, I think, 3 of them should cost us roughly $1,200.
How many do we have right now?
I think 3. And that's somewhat of a guess, but it's no more than 3. So at any rate, I give you this information just because I think it's helpful when we decide how we're going to prioritize things. The last thing is, I think we've decided that we're not going to do anything like I mentioned, camping pads. We're not going to do anything like that until we have our site plans done. The contract with Craft and Tull has been signed. I sent that to them. They should, I presume, be working on that right now. And then once we have those site plans, we can start, let me restate that, site plans and then information from other consultants like the lake consultant that we have. By then, we should have our request for proposals done for, and by done, I mean input included from the architects or engineers that are interested for the dam repairs, for any sort of improvements at the day use area, ball field area, and the shuttle area. And also, we should have them for Basin Park as well. So at this point, even if we put something on a budget, and I'm asking for camping pets, and I don't know that I will at this point, but we won't do any of that unless it is part of a rather comprehensive plan. So that, I think, is all I have to say about where we're going with our finances, or our financial reporting at least, and happy to answer any questions.
I want to throw in a comment before I forget. Talking about engineers, plans, all this stuff, because I get the feedback from people at the restaurant, and I hear we all do, but
Yeah.
I get it too. there's some discussions, what are we building out there? What are we doing? Why are we hiring engineers? Why are we making master plans with engineers? Are they building some new things out there? Are they building buildings? There's just some, I think we're going to need to make sure we do some outreach to let people know why we have, to make them really understand why we're doing this. I don't think the average person, or maybe they do, maybe they don't, but they're talking to each other. They don't understand why we've done this, what those engineers can do, and why they're hired.
Well, let me comment on that, and that's really, we've broken that down to 3 areas at least that we're doing substantial planning on, and that would be Basin Park, number 1, and frankly, that's because it is falling apart.
Right.
We already know about the, we have a grant to replace the stone or repair the stone underneath the fountain, but there's a collapse of the culverts, or I hesitate to even call them culverts, but the drainage tunnels underneath. There's the bandstand or band shell has some major problems that we can't just make repairs. I did get the roof repaired. There was a roof leak, but there's some major problems there that we have visited. Kevin has been there with me. Our maintenance person, Vince, has looked at it with me, and I think we're all in agreement that it probably needs to be completely rebuilt. And the underlying issues, basically because of drainage and unfortunate designs, have to be dealt with. If we're going to dig up concrete to repair a drainage, a culvert or a drainage tunnel, we might as well go ahead and do the rest of the concrete that needs to be, or that's old and in terrible shape. Why are we going to have a comprehensive plan for that? Well, because there's all sorts of other issues, like do we leave beds for plants where they are? Do we move them, or do we maximize the space that we have in the plaza for people who are watching events? So that type of thing. So we need comprehensive planning. And I really want to say this on the record, because the ball field area would be another area. And I got a call from Shreya, who is of course, very active with the soccer league, and had some concerns there. And I assured him, I said, look, at this point, all we are doing, we're not making plans at this point. We're gathering information. And so, yes, we will consider all of those fields. Are they going to remain ball fields, especially the baseball or softball field? Or are we going to repurpose them to something else? We don't know at this point. And I want everybody to please understand, and I say this for all of us, if we make a suggestion such as, well, maybe we should turn the baseball field into, I don't know, you name it, that at this point is nothing more than a thought. Nothing will be done without gathering all of our information first, having public input before any decision is made, and I think we all agree on that. So I ask everybody to please understand that is the process. Right now, it's merely gathering information. And so, let's see, that was 2 areas. Though the other area is the day use area at Lake Leatherwood Park. I think we all know that the bathhouse, for instance, needs to be renovated. So, you know, if I had a crystal ball, I'd say, yeah, that's probably going to be one of the things we do. But I can't say for sure until we go through this entire process.
I think the best way to answer the question is that in the past, things were done without any planning, without any forethought, without any thought for how it would impact things down the road. A lot of the improved camping pads were built in an area that floods every single spring.
That's a good
Those
example.
are kind of the mistakes that are made when you don't have a comprehensive plan that's guiding your development in the future. It doesn't mean that we're building anything or planning to build anything right now. Right now, we've got we've got rebuilding projects and restoration projects that far exceed any money that we have to spend for the next 4 or 5 years. But there has to be a plan for the way things are used in the future and the way they're done. Scott has made the comment in the past that the ball fields are the most expensive maintenance area that we have in all of the parks, and we get zero revenue from it. And very little use. Frankly, most of the time, it's used as an open dog park, even though there's signs all over the place that says no dogs on the ball fields. So, yes, there probably are better uses for some of the areas that we've got, but that will come out as part of this process down the road.
I think that you did give me a good way to say that to Shreya, and I've spoken with Shreya multiple times, as well as other, mostly soccer people, but others as well. I tried to think of a way to explain it, and I realized some of it is just, I used the word ignorant, but that's in the way, the normal way that the word means, that they're ignorant of what an engineering firm does.
Right.
And I tried to explain to someone the other day, I said, well, it's like you hire an architect to do your house, or you can build it yourself. You can buy a plan from Sears, for goodness sakes, and build it yourself, or you can hire an architect. We're hiring these people because they do the planning, so we don't have to plan it. And I didn't say it as eloquently as you did, but that kind of made sense. I think people that are coming to me don't understand what this firm is for, what they do. They don't get it. And that's the questions I'm getting. So I think if I try to use the camping pads as an example and other things like that to make them understand.
Well, here's a great example. Our infrastructure, especially our underground infrastructure, our power and our septic and our water lines break routinely. They probably have to be completely repaired. We have basically a sketch. I'm happy to say it's not on a napkin. It's on an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, a sketch that shows where our water lines are and our septic lines. Our septic lines, we spent thousands of dollars this year blowing those out. We have to bring in a high-pressure pump that actually blows them out. Somebody, here again, a lack of planning. They put septic lines in, and then over the years didn't think, well, maybe we should keep trees cleared from that area, so we have tree roots that are growing through our septic lines. I have seen at least one document that shows that there's a septic holding tank and drain field within, it's hard to say from the document, but 20 or 30 feet of the lake.
Yeah.
I don't even know if that's truly there, where it shows it. It is on that particular document. And so that's what we're doing, is gathering that sort of information. So we have site plans that show what we have as-built site plans, what buildings are there, what infrastructure is there, and then we know, well, we're not going to build a building right here when that's right where our septic lines are, or we know that we have to relocate those septic lines because they go through what's now forest. And so that's what we're doing right now. In fact, I caution myself after discussions with Chris Fisher. He's like, well, you're working on this master plan, and he's happy that we are, but I have to remind myself not to really use that word for what we're doing right now, because right now we are gathering information, and we have that lake consultant. We have, we need the site plans. We need to know what we're actually dealing with underground here at Basin Park. So that's really what we're doing, and when I say you, I mean the public certainly has my assurances that I won't do any sorts of those large projects without having it part of a well-defined plan. And I know that this commission and whoever fills these seats will be the same. I imagine if I did do those sorts of things without comprehensive planning, I would probably be looking for other employment, because I don't think the commission would stand for it. So we are in a planning stage, and I really want the public to understand that.
I do too. I want people to understand what this planning stage is and why it's necessary, and
Yes.
to not be afraid of it to the point where then they start to make up their own answers of what they think.
Yes.
And that's what I worry about, is kind of getting this little conversation going about, why are they doing this? What are they doing? What are they doing? And I've heard that too much.
Yeah.
So I think we need to be really aware of that and make sure we understand that explaining what we're doing is, and y'all know that, just saying what we all know.
Yeah.
Keep explaining it to people and let them know. The public input is important, but also, I mean, there's nobody here, but we have to have some public meetings at some point.
Absolutely. But the first thing is the public input is important, but the professional input is important because the public doesn't know where a septic tank is or where
Right.
a leach field is or where the water lines are until we have professionals identify those.
I think they need to realize that's why you hire people like these
Yes.
firms. I think I'm getting some people confused about that, or hearing people are. So, well, good.
Okay.
That's all I got.
Now, I was going to say one thing. My suggestion, and based on what we did last year on the budgeting, last year we budgeted at a very granular level based on what we thought we were going to get done. The work at Basin Park, the work at Magnetics, some other things. I think it would behoove us, things that we don't know what it's going to cost, don't put it in as a line item. We've got the LLC capital expenses, that's driven by the 8% tax. That can go in as a line. That money is dedicated to spend at Lake Leatherwood on major cost items. If we don't know what they are, it simply goes in as a line, and as we define that work and get actual numbers for it, then Scott will come back to the commission and get the commission to approve a portion of that allocated money for that. I would do the same thing in town for capital expenses. We know everything down through overhead and operating expenses, we pretty well know what those are or can forecast what those are based on historical values. It's really the major expense items, and for now, we just need to budget a block of capital to attack those, and then as we define projects and get real bids, real numbers that we know what they are, that we can allocate portions of that money to it. It'll be, I think it's a little more straightforward way of budgeting, rather than spending a lot of time guessing at what something's going to cost.
Right, and that's why, even though I have right now a list of things that we may want to consider, even if we, let's say, you approve 10 of those items, they're probably not going to be line items. It's helping us to define how much we need for a particular, let's just take maintenance and repairs. That might be comprised of 5 or 6 of these bigger projects, but they won't be itemized on the, budget, but we need to know how we get that bottom line number that we're going to put on that particular account. That is, I believe, what you had in mind.
Yeah, you're going to have to build up to those numbers,
Right.
but it's
Right.
rather than assigning lines for things that
That
we
makes
haven't
sense to me.
defined yet.
Yeah,
It's like doing it, instead of backwards, doing it the other way.
Yeah, and it's just like
Makes much
Basin
more
Park.
sense.
I mean, we had every intention of doing the stone walls there and rebuilding the fountain so that it quits sinking into the ground, but it's pointless to do that with everything else that needs to be
Right.
done at this point. So that was money that could have actually been budgeted towards something else.
Yeah, instead of
this
just
year.
sat there.
So I think that's a better approach, and as we start ticking the boxes off and getting the information we need, then we can start moving forward on projects. Okay?
Okay,
any other questions?
Thank you.
I'm good.
Thank you.
I'm done. Thank you.
Okay. That's a wrap.
That's a wrap.